out of his face.
One man may hold the key to this mystery.
I don't know, man. I don't know.
Witnesses don't always tell you everything.
As Lieutenant Joe Kenda zeroes in on the shooter, he uncovers a tale of manipulation and greed.
We're now starting to see a different perspective of this case.
It begs the eternal question, what is the human life worth?
You become very cold in this business. Violence is what you do. You're surrounded by it. You're knee-deep in it. It's your job. You find who did this. That's what you're there for.
It's a quiet Sunday morning in southeast Colorado Springs as Marie Bassett begins her daily prayers.
It was very comforting to her. She always had her Bible. Sundays were peaceful, nice way to start the day.
The particular prayer that she was reading talked about how we know what love is and how we should be willing to give up our lives for our own brothers and sisters.
She gets up to see what it is. She hears the squeal of tires as a car is leaving the area.
I would imagine she was just trying to get her head around whatever was happening.
Across town, Lieutenant Joe Kenda is enjoying the scenic ride to Colorado Springs Police Headquarters.
It was my time to just sit back and relax. Time to sort of ease into work.
But Kenda's easy morning is about to go up in smoke.
Dispatch for Kenda.
Go for Kenda.
The radio cracks that there is a shooting victim at St. Francis Hospital.
Be advised, the victim is in critical condition. He was brought there by a friend who is also being treated.
10-4, I'm en route. Kenda out.
I'm going to go straight there for two reasons: to find out what the condition of this person is, and what does this witness know about how this came to happen. As I pull into that ER parking area, there's a green vehicle, passenger car, sitting there with the door open.
Lieutenant.
How you doing?
Good.
So what do we got?
I don't know a whole lot more than you do right now. We just got here before you.
The officer tells me that the victim is Arthur Gibbs. He's 20 years old. He was brought into the hospital by a witness in that vehicle, the green car.
Who's that?
That's the nurse that admitted him.
Thank you. How you doing? I understand you were the admitting nurse. Can you tell me what happened? Start from the beginning.
Yeah. I was organizing files, and this man came bursting through the ER doors, screaming that his friend had been shot.
Help! Please help! I need some help. My friend's been shot. Come on!
You got a gunshot victim? Grab the gurney, let's go. His face was all bruised. He was covered in blood. We just got a gurney out here and got him in as fast as possible.
Come on, help me, please!
They immediately extricate the party from the car, get him into surgery.
He's bleeding profusely from a gunshot wound to the face and another gunshot wound to the back.
We don't know if it entered the brain cavity.
In the case of gunshot wound to the face, 90% of the people die and die before they reach a hospital for treatment. Arthur is alive, so it's perhaps he's among the 10%.
Can you tell me about the man that brought in Mr. Gibbs?
Yeah, his name was Isaac Watson.
The nurse explains that the witness is 33 years old, and they are checking his face to see if he has any further injuries.
And did you say where his friend got shot? Which neighborhood?
Yeah, several blocks away.
He told her that the shooting actually occurred several blocks from the hospital at the intersection of Cimarron and Institute.
And you mentioned that his face was bruised up.
Yeah.
Do you know if he'd been fighting with the victim?
He didn't really give a lot of details.
Hey, Riss. What do you need, Lieutenant? Can you find out when we can talk to Isaac Watson and make sure you test his hands for gunshot residue? Will do.
No one is ruled out as a suspect until the facts say so.
It's not unheard of that two individuals have an argument. These could be friends. It escalates to physical confrontation. Somebody gets wounded, shot, or killed, at which time the friend usually jumps in and tries to help.
Is that what happened here? Well, I don't know that, but it's certainly among the things that concern me.
Before questioning Isaac Watson, Kenda examines the car he used to drive Arthur to the hospital.
What a mess.
There's a large quantity of blood across the front passenger seat.
Somebody had been bleeding profusely in this car. And the rest of the inside of the car was pretty dirty.
Yeah, we also found this.
Is that a bullet hole?
That's what it looks like.
The officers point out a bullet hole in the seatbelt release mechanism, which would indicate that perhaps that's the bullet that hit him in the back. So Arthur was sitting here when he was shot, and the nearly vertical trajectory tells me something else. It's possible that Mr. Gibbs was speaking with the shooter through that open window. That's also a point for Mr. Watson's side. If he's the driver, why would he be standing over there on the other side of the car? So it is an indicator that there is someone else besides Mr. Watson as part of this.
Another indication is the results from Isaac Watson's GSR test.
Watson's test came back negative. Let's take a look inside.
His hands say he didn't fire a weapon, so Mr. Watson is looking less and less likely to be the person responsible for this.
As Kenda and the investigators process the car, they find another surprise.
Check this out.
There is a knife stuffed in the cushions in the front seat.
And that knife was bloody. So your thoughts right away are, did this shooting occur because there was a fight going on? Somebody got stabbed, and in retaliation, somebody got shot?
There's one last thing that catches Kenda's eye.
What's that? It's like a jacket, maybe?
There was a white jacket in the back of this car.
Now we know Mr. Gibbs is wearing a dark-colored jacket. We know Watson is wearing a light-colored jacket covered in blood.
You want to go bag that up? Sure.
Whose coat is that?
Lieutenant Kenda.
I was thinking about that jacket when I'm approached by Officer Webb, who tells me he heard that Arthur was the victim in this shooting, and I said he is.
Yeah, why? You know him?
Yes, I recently met him. I was called out to his mother's house on a domestic call.
Stupid, you know.
Please don't leave.
Don't touch me.
Please, I'm sorry.
Officer Webb went on to explain that the mother had developed a relationship with a Gary Hilton, who was her semi-boyfriend, but was also verbally and physically abusive to her.
Arthur and his mom needed Gary Hilton financially. And to some extent, I'm sure his mom needed Gary Hilton emotionally.
He paid half the rent, but that came with a price. And that price was emotional and physical abuse.
She finally got fed up with it, and with the assistance of her son Arthur, they threw Gary Hilton out.
You don't tell me what to do.
Yes, I do. My mom wants you out. Hey, get your hands off her. Stay away from us. Stay away from us.
The commotion led the neighbors to alert the cops.
Move, man. Hey, knock it off. I said knock it off.
It got so heated that Webb called for assistance.
Get your hands off her. Stay away from us. Start me back up.
The incident gets Kenda's wheels spinning.
Even though police help break up a domestic dispute one day, that doesn't mean it's over. Feelings can fester, and somebody can seek revenge for something like that.
Watch your back. You better watch your back.
Hey, let it go.
Now we have a victim whose family's involved in domestic that he got involved in also.
All right, notify the mother of Arthur's condition and find Gary Hilton. I want to talk to him as soon as possible.
Yes, sir.
Gary Hilton, did he put a bullet in Arthur's face? That at the moment is the $64 question. So here we are. We have Arthur Gibbs, shot in the face, fighting for his life. And we have Gary Hilton in a recent violent argument with our victim.
While officers track down Gary Hilton, Kenda and his team head to the street corner where the shooting allegedly occurred.
It's a very nice little area, Colorado Springs. A lot of middle-income homes.
This is not where Arthur lived. So the other question becomes, why is he at the intersection of Cimarron and Institute at 6 o'clock in the morning?
Did you find anything?
Didn't see anything.
All right, why don't you go knock on some doors?
So where do you suppose their car was parked? Because I'm not seeing anything.
I have no idea.
The intersection of Cimarron and Institute as the crime scene, that's a large area.
Scenes are as you find them. They're not always perfect. They don't always have identifiable evidence present.
This is Kenda. Why don't you go ahead and bring Watson down to me along with some more officers to help canvass. In the meantime, let's block off this whole intersection.
I want to get Mr. Watson down there physically so that he can be specific about what corner they were sitting on.
I would have been.
Officer Webb to Lieutenant Kenda.
Go for Kenda.
It's Officer Webb, and he reports that he has information as to the location of Gary Hilton, the estranged boyfriend of Arthur's mother.
Lieutenant, I don't know if this is going to be good news or bad news. Colorado Springs Police Department.
Webb tells me that when he went to this apartment, he found it to be vacant.
He was unable to make contact at the door, but a neighbor came out.
Hey, they're not there. They got evicted.
Arthur's mother and Arthur moved out of this residence.
His mother moved out and had gone to Tulsa, Oklahoma to visit her mother.
She further said that she also knows Gary Hilton and that he immediately moved to California, which was several days before the shooting.
I've made a few phone calls and I was able to confirm that information, sir.
All right, thanks for letting me know.
So we've eliminated someone that looked promising as a suspect, but we still have other things that have to be resolved.
More than ever, Kenda and his team need to talk to Isaac Watson, who's been given clearance by the hospital to travel to the crime scene.
There had to be more behind what had occurred.
Miss Watson?
And the police were very anxious to find out what had occurred.
So tell us what happened.
We were parked right here. We were just trying to figure out what we were going to do for the night.
He points out which corner and says that he and Arthur were sitting in his car.
So what we going to do?
He and Arthur were just talking.
Who is this? You know them?
When this dark-colored vehicle approaches and comes to a screeching halt.
Hey, Lieutenant, check this out.
We clearly see side pressure scuff marks from tires that confirm his story.
What happened next?
That's when they came at us.
Watson tells me that two Hispanic males get out of that car. One is wearing a black trench coat. He comes up on the passenger side of the car. The other guy's got a rifle.
Give us your money. Give us your money. Right now. Come on.
They don't have anything to give them, and a fight ensues.
Give us the money. Go on, give me your money. Give me your money right now.
As the yelling and screaming and demands are going back and forth, he hears two gunshots. He looks over at his friend. He sees blood pouring out of his face.
Both the Hispanic males ran back to their darkened color car that was being driven by a third Hispanic male.
Oh my God!
And they sped away.
Isaac is really emotionally upset at this time when we talk to him.
Officer, you want to search this whole area for evidence of a shooting?
Yes, sir.
They searched the area, and they found nothing. No casings, no projectiles, no ballistic evidence whatsoever.
Although Isaac Watson's story is plausible, Kenda hopes that he can at least explain the evidence found in his car.
Now, I know this is difficult, but what can you tell me about the knife in Arthur's seat and the extra coat in the back?
I don't know, man. I don't know. I don't know anything about that.
He suddenly becomes evasive.
When you're vague and when you don't come forth with all the information that you have, it's going to raise some questions.
Mr. Watson, this is your car. What do you mean you don't know?
The jacket might have been Arthur's. I don't know.
Well, Arthur's wearing it, Jack. So it's the first indication that Watson is lying. So there's obviously more to Mr. Watson than meets the eye.
Witnesses don't always tell you everything that occurred. They may tell you little bits and pieces to match what the evidence may show.
I know you're upset. I'm gonna let you go. We will talk again.
I wanted to plant that seed in his mind, that his story isn't working, so that he's aware that I will come back to him.
Kenda's certain Isaac Watson isn't being completely honest, and the facts of the case are still proving elusive. Until an officer uncovers another piece of evidence.
Go for Kenda.
Lieutenant, you're going to want to take a look at something. I'm 2 blocks south of the intersection.
We'll be right there.
This is James Jones, the homeowner.
Thank you. So what can you tell me, Mr. Jones?
Well, I came out to see what all the commotion was about, and this is what I found.
There's fresh blood on the fence.
You want to get a tech out here to get some photographs and a sample?
Looks like there's some more over here.
Well, thank you.
Yes, sir.
So now that we have this other blood evidence and Watson being reluctant to talk about a knife and a jacket, maybe this isn't an attempted robbery at all.
Could the white jacket belong to an unidentified third person?
Told you, man. What's up?
And could this third person have gotten into a fight with Arthur?
Get out of my face, man.
A knife fight.
Get out of here.
Maybe this is a fight between people that know each other.
What's wrong with you?
Not far from the bloody fence, investigators find another clue.
We start following what we believe to be a blood trail. It goes through a yard and ends up underneath a picnic table.
This could be the owner of the jacket in the back seat. This could be the guy that maybe gets cut with that knife in the front seat.
From the amount of blood, looks like whoever was here stayed for a while. Want to check with the hospitals?
Yeah.
So are they hiding? Are they drunk? What are they?
Rich to dispatch.
Detectives contact nearby hospitals to see if anyone has been recently treated for knife wounds.
Dispatch, go ahead.
This is Ritz.
There was a male who came into St. Francis earlier this morning. His name was Pablo Ortega. He was treated for severe cuts and then released.
Okay, thank you.
Let's go.
Pablo Ortega, and he lives off of Cimarron Street. A bleeding Hispanic male, close to the scene of a shooting. This could be important.
It doesn't take long for Kenda's men to track down Pablo Ortega. Outside the residence, Kenda and his team prepare to make contact with their new prime suspect.
This could result in a gun battle in the next 10 seconds.
You just want to be prepared for anything, because when you knock on the door, you don't know what's on the other side.
We knock, the police knock, the kind that wakes the dead.
Police, open up!
As the door starts to slowly open, my first concern is, I hope I can see your hands. If I can't see your hands, you're going to see a gun. At this stage in the investigation, Arthur Gibbs is fighting for his life at St. Francis. St. Francis says they treated a Pablo Ortega for a serious cut. We believe he may be a suspect in this case. We're about to confront him.
Police, open up! Let me see your hands.
What's going on?
Is Pablo Ortega in there?
Yes.
We need to speak with him.
Pablo Ortega?
Yes.
Step out here. ahead and search him.
We explain to him why we're there. We say there's been a shooting at the intersection here by your house.
I don't know anything about a shooting.
But you were involved in an altercation with somebody.
How'd you get the knife slash on your hand?
It wasn't a knife.
He goes on to tell us that he was out the night before with his girlfriend, Ernestina Martinez. She wasn't feeling well, so he took her home. He drops her off at the house, he gets ready to leave, his car won't start.
So when he goes back to Ernestina's door, Rodriguez, Ernestina's stepfather, comes to the door.
Hey, what are you doing here?
The problem is her stepfather doesn't like Pablo at all.
My car won't start.
I don't care. You stay away from me.
I don't want any trouble.
I don't want to see you with my daughter.
The front door has a large window pane in it. When the stepfather tries to slam it,
Stay away from here.
Pablo breaks the glass and cuts his arm.
Man, what the hell you doing? You bring my freaking door.
Now the stepfather is enraged.
Come here. I'm gonna kick your ass.
Ernestina's stepfather started chasing him, and that's why he ran and was climbing over fences and hiding in people's backyards.
I can take you and show you where I cut myself.
All right, let's go.
Minutes later, they arrive at Ernestina's parents' house.
See, look at the front door.
There's a big piece of cardboard over the door. There's broken glass on the porch. The glass has blood on it. Pablo's story is true.
It is a major coincidence that we have another issue going on that left a blood trail that was real close to our shooting scene.
Well, thank you for your cooperation.
We'll give you a lift home.
The next day, Kenda and his team regroup, trying once more to put the pieces of this puzzle together.
Hey, Lieutenant. Just got the lab results back on the knife that we found in the car.
Okay.
The blood on the knife actually belongs to Arthur.
Probably a drainage wound.
It is blood-soaked from the wounds in our victim.
All right, let me know if you find out anything else.
However, it's still not clear why Arthur was carrying a knife in the first place. And that's not the only thing Kenda and Ritz are struggling to make sense of.
We don't have any explanation for the white jacket in the back, which continues to bother us.
There seemed to be a third person, but nobody could quite figure out who it was or why this person wasn't coming forward.
Hoping to convince their mystery man to step up, Kenda turns to the local news media for help.
There is a Crime Stopper program in Colorado Springs on television news, encouraging people who have information about a crime to call the Crime Stoppers number.
You're really hoping that somebody involved tells a girlfriend, tells a wife, tells a brother, and that person will inevitably come forward.
Not long after reports hit the airwaves, a credible lead rolls in.
One of the Crime Stoppers tips led us to contact an individual by the name of Kenny Booth.
Hello? Well, is this Kenny Booth?
Yeah.
So we talked to Kenny Booth by phone. He's cooperative.
You understand you have some information about the shooting near Cimarron Institute? Tell me what you saw.
Yes, I was in the area at the time. Driving by, I saw two cars, a black car and a green car.
He says there were 3 Hispanic guys there, and they were in a black car, and they were parked in front of the green car. Well, that's correct. Watson's car is green.
What's up, guys?
He knows our victim, Arthur, and he knows Isaac, but he also knows there was a third person in the car.
This other guy, I think his name was Raymond Baxter, who was in the back seat.
Right.
Raymond Baxter. So now there are 3 people in that car, as I suspected it would be.
Well, I appreciate the help. Thank you. Bye.
So now I know that Isaac Watson is lying. I suspected he was lying, but now I know he was.
But before Kenda re-questions Watson, he has a new man to track down.
Watson said that other jacket probably belonged to Gibbs. It didn't belong to Gibbs. It belonged to Raymond Baxter. Raymond Baxter is a diamond in the rough. He was in the car when all this action happened. We need to find him. Here we are. We still have Arthur Gibbs in critical condition, and inch by inch, we're getting to the truth. Raymond Baxter could be the magic in this case.
Yes. Thank you for coming in, Mr. Baxter.
No problem. What do you want to know?
Raymond is cooperative. He wants to help. He says he's with him that night.
I don't know what I'm gonna do. I mean, I'm broke. I got $10, so. See, yeah, he got $10, I got a couple dollars. You good, man, relax.
Arthur was particularly sad because his mother and he had been evicted.
Arthur was obviously upset about his mom leaving the state.
He was in a desperate way. So Raymond and Isaac are trying to help him out.
Isaac and I, we wanted to cheer him up. We figured we'd party with him.
How specifically?
Crack. Arthur was a smoker.
We're now starting to see a different perspective of this case. We're seeing individuals involved in drugs.
Raymond explains, to help Arthur escape his troubles, he and Isaac pooled their money and bought him a little pick-me-up.
I'm not lonely. Yeah, you not no more.
He got $10.
They have been up all night smoking crack, buying crack, until they're absolutely flat broke.
And they still wanted to smoke some more, so they were thinking of ways to make some money.
It was all Arthur's idea.
What was?
A way to make some more cash.
How'd you do that?
By selling soap rock, bunk junk.
Bunk junk in this case would be very simply something made to look like crack cocaine.
His plan is to take a bar of soap and chip it with the knife he has in the seat, cut pieces out of the bar of soap. And they look remarkably like crack cocaine. So now we've explained the knife. The knife is used to produce soap chips, not to assault people with.
But I didn't stick around to sell no soap rock. I left.
Did you leave anything behind?
Yeah. I later realized I left my jacket behind.
And he correctly described the jacket we found.
After hearing Raymond's story,
In the extra jacket.
I don't know, man. I don't know.
it's now clear why Isaac Watson lied to the police.
He didn't want to talk about the drugs. Didn't want to talk about the soap either. We're going to go round up Mr. Watson and re-interview him to see what else he can tell us.
We appreciate your help. Is there anything else you think we should know?
Yeah, but like I said, I left before it all went down. But as I was walking off, I do think I saw the guys that did it.
A black car pulled up with 3 Hispanic males. He said he recognized the driver.
His name is Anthony Beale.
No Mr. X anymore. It's Anthony Vigil and his buds are who we're looking for.
You mind sticking around for a little bit? I'll show you a couple of pictures, things like that.
Okay, no problem.
You hungry?
Sure.
Give you some. Be right back, all right?
Okay.
While Kenda has officers out rounding up Anthony Vigil and Isaac Watson, the victim takes a turn for the worse.
Unfortunately, he never regained consciousness.
Arthur Gibbs is dead. Now it's a homicide.
Shortly after Arthur Gibbs is pronounced deceased, police arrive at the home of Anthony Vigil.
When the officers go out to his residence, we see a black car. It's consistent with the statements.
Anthony Vigil? Yeah. Hi, Colorado Springs PD. We'd like to speak to you downtown about something, if you have a minute.
I can't.
I gotta take my sister to the airport or she'll miss her flight.
I'll tell you what, we don't want the young lady to miss her flight. Could you come afterwards?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
We don't have probable cause for an arrest, but we show some cooperation. We generally get some cooperation.
After Anthony drops off his sister, he sits down for a chat with Kenda.
I'm Lieutenant Kenda, this is Detective Ritz.
Look, man, I don't know nothing.
He didn't know nothing about nothing. He didn't know anything about a shooting. He's never been to Cimarron Institute. Anthony is a criminal. He has a history. His immediate denial of anything to do with anything is your first clue that he's involved in it.
You don't know anything at all.
I was with my girlfriend last night.
And I'm sure that she'll confirm this.
Of course.
He knows she'll lie for him. He doesn't offer a stranger as an alibi because a stranger might not go along with it. The girlfriend's loyal and he knows it.
Hip to the game Anthony is running, Kenda once again plays the good cop card.
Look, Anthony, we appreciate your cooperation in all this. Would you mind taking a polygraph?
Just help us iron out a couple things.
Sure.
I'll set that up.
They are an indicator of guilt or innocence, supposedly. But the only value to a polygraph, in my opinion, is if it elicits a statement.
Once he's hooked up to the polygraph machine, the polygraphist starts asking questions.
Are you wearing shoes?
Yes.
Do you own a black car?
Yes.
Were you with your girlfriend last night?
Yes.
Okay, Anthony, this test is over.
After the test, the examiner steps out in the hallway with me and says he is lying through his teeth. Now it's time to confront Anthony.
We want to really attack Anthony V. Hill about his statement or his lack of truthfulness. We want to make sure we have all our ducks in a row.
All right, Raymond.
So we put together a photo lineup of Anthony while he's sitting in the polygraph suite. We show it to our eyewitness, Raymond, the backseat passenger.
Do you recognize the driver of the black car from the morning when Arthur was shot?
I sure do.
It takes him less than 5 seconds.
He looks at this photo lineup and immediately identifies Anthony V. Hill.
Thank you.
Give me just a minute. I'll be right back with you.
So, Anthony, just to confirm your statement, you don't know anything about the shooting, now murder.
That's right.
Well, Anthony, the polygraph says different. Furthermore, somebody who knows you said that they saw you in your black car at the scene.
Isn't that odd, Anthony? Don't you think that's odd?
Anthony's now nervous. We've hit him with the fact that we know he's lied.
Listen, we know you were there. I can just charge you with murder right now, or you can tell us what happened.
Okay, I was there, but I didn't shoot anybody.
And who did, Anthony?
I'll tell you all about it.
Cool. That's what I want to know. We were finally able to identify the driver of the suspect vehicle, Anthony V. Hill. We have him in our hands, and he has decided to tell us what happened. The truth, finally.
He admitted that he was there at the scene. He was driving the car, but he didn't shoot anybody.
He says Carter Villarreal's in the back seat and Leo Arguello's in the right front passenger seat.
Describe Leo for us.
He was wearing a black trench coat and he's got acne scars on his cheeks.
That's the description Watson gave of the shooter.
Look, I know Leo and Carter did it, but I didn't see exactly what went on.
If you want to know that, you're going to have to ask them too.
Loyalty in the criminal world only applies in conversation. It never applies in reality.
While Kenda's team works up warrants on the two suspects, he receives some unexpected news.
You want us to bring in Leo Arguello and Carlos Villarreal?
Right.
They're already in county. They were arrested 2 days ago for robbery.
Thank you.
Perfect.
Thank you for coming back in.
After bringing Raymond Baxter and Isaac Watson back in, Ritz puts together 2 more photo lineups, which include his new suspects.
Let me know if you see the other 2 people from the car.
Take a closer look.
We showed a photo lineup to Raymond and Isaac, and they're both able to positively identify these 2 individuals as being the other 2 individuals at the scene.
That's them. Yeah. This guy. This guy.
You sure these 2?
Those are the 2.
Okay, that's what we need.
Raymond is allowed to leave. We've got all the information we needed from him that we're gonna get.
Oh, Isaac, you're not going anywhere. Sit down.
Isaac's not allowed to leave yet.
What's going on?
Well, first off, I need to tell you, your friend Arthur's dead.
Now we're going to get the truth from him, finally.
Now, your friend is dead, and you're part of the reason why he's dead. Now, I want the truth. You owe it to your friend to tell me what happened.
Okay.
Watson says that they're sitting there selling soap to people, and they're getting away with it. They've made a couple of sales. This black car pulls in front of them.
You guys trying to buy some rock? Yeah, you got some? Yeah, I got some. Be right back.
So Arthur goes and manufactures the crack. And Isaac stays up there to keep them busy, talking to them about nothing, to give Arthur time to make his product. Now, is Arthur committing a crime by selling somebody a chip of soap? No. He is, on the other hand, doing something incredibly dangerous.
Yo, man.
Arthur and Isaac both expect that this car is going to leave. They don't leave. They sit there and they try to smoke it. And when they realize it melts instead of burns, and it's soap.
This isn't real.
It smells like soap.
They are wild.
One of the worst things you can do is actually rip off somebody in a drug deal, particularly when you're talking about cocaine.
Why are they coming back?
What the hell are you trying to pull, huh? Sorry. Huh? Who do you think I am, huh? Give me that money. Come on, get your money back.
It doesn't make any difference. It doesn't matter. Leo is pissed.
Nobody does this to me. Nobody.
Let's go.
Leo and Carter drive off at a high rate of speed.
Yo, Arthur! Arthur!
Isaac realizes that he's in real trouble and he takes him to the hospital. Those are the facts that we've been trying to learn for a very long time.
With Isaac Watson's statement in tow, Carter Villarreal decides he wants to speak to Kenda as well.
Oh, good. What do you have to say, Carter?
Carter admits to everything. corroborating Isaac's story.
Isaac already gave us his full statement. Do you agree with that statement?
I mean, I roughed him up a bit. All right, but I swear to God I didn't shoot nobody.
He also talks about the murder weapon.
After the shooting, Leo wants him to take the bullets and actually the cylinder of the weapon and hide it, which he does. He buries it outside his bedroom window.
Is that where it still is?
Yeah.
We used a metal detector to find the buried metal. We dug there, and in an athletic sock was the cylinder and the bullets from the murder weapon.
With his partner in crime now rolling over on him, Leo Arguello also comes clean. Arguello pleads guilty to second-degree murder and is sentenced to 48 years in prison. The driver, Anthony Vigil, pleads guilty to conspiracy and receives 12 years. And due to his cooperation, Carter Villarreal receives a reduced sentence of 5 years.
Arthur was just so young. He probably didn't have the guidance or the will to really make a decision in terms of what type of man he wanted to be in life.
What's really unfortunate about this particular case, the victim's only 20 years old. 20 years old. A death over insult has to be the worst possible reason to take a human life.
At 2:17 a.m., the dispatcher wrote down the address twice, slowly, as if repetition could make it real. A quiet residential street outside Lubbock, Texas. No screaming, no panique, just a call that cut off mid-sentence, leaving behind nothing but dead air and the sound of breathing that didn't belong to anyone on record. When patrol arrived 7 minutes later, the porch light was still on. The front door was open. Inside, the house felt paused, like a scene abandoned in the middle of a thought. A coffee mug half full, shoes lined neatly by the wall, a television glowing blue in an empty living room, and in the hallway, a dark stain already drying, as if time itself had decided to move on without permission. This is where the story should have ended. But it didn't. This is where Texas 2003 became a cold case. The victim's name was Emily Harper, 26 years old, elementary school teacher, known in the neighborhood as the woman who waved first, who brought cookies to new residents, who never missed Sunday dinner at her parents' place 3 towns over. No history of violence. No enemies anyone could name. The kind of life police departments quietly dread, because it offers no obvious cracks. Emily was found on the bedroom floor, one shoe still on, the other missing, her body angled toward the door as if she had been trying to leave. There were no signs of forced entry. No weapon recovered. No note. Just silence, thick and uncooperative. By sunrise, the street was sealed off with yellow tape, stretching from mailbox to mailbox like a warning. No one had ordered, but everyone understood. Neighbors stood barefoot on their lawns, arms crossed, whispering theories before investigators had even finished their first walkthrough. In small Texas communities, tragedy doesn't arrive quietly. It seeps in. It lingers. It watches who looks away first. The initial investigation moved fast, almost aggressively, as if speed alone could keep the case from slipping. Detectives cataloged fingerprints, fibers, shoe impressions. They interviewed coworkers, friends, former boyfriends, the barista who served Emily coffee every morning. They traced her last known movements, minute by minute, hour by hour, building a timeline so tight it felt airtight. Emily had left work at 3:42 p.m. She stopped at the grocery store at 4:10. She was seen driving home at 4:27. A neighbor remembered hearing her garage door close just before 5. After that, nothing. No phone calls. No texts. No sightings. It was as if she had stepped into a shadow and never stepped back out. There was blood in the hallway, but not enough to explain how she died. There were defensive wounds, but no clear pattern. The autopsy offered more questions than answers. Cause of death: blunt force trauma. Time of death: a window wide enough to hide a parade. Toxicology, clean. Whoever did this knew when to act and, more importantly, when not to. The media arrived by noon. Camera crews angled for the best shot of the house. Reporters practiced phrases like quiet neighborhood and shocked community, as if they were reading from a shared script. Emily's face appeared on screens across the state, smiling in a school photo taken just months earlier. The headline wrote itself, "Young Teacher Found Dead, Texas Community Reels." But headlines don't solve cases. They just make the waiting louder. Detectives leaned hard on the people closest to her. That's how it always starts. Her parents were questioned separately, then together. Her ex-boyfriend, Mark Ellison, was brought in twice, his alibi checked and rechecked until even he began to doubt his own memory. He had been at work. Time cards confirmed it. Co-workers confirmed it. Still, suspicion lingered, not because of evidence, but because absence demands a substitute. If you don't know who did it, you start with who could have. Weeks passed. Leads dried up. The blood sample in the hallway didn't match anyone in the system. The partial fingerprint on the bedroom doorframe came back inconclusive. A neighbor reported seeing a dark pickup truck parked nearby that evening, but couldn't remember the license plate, or even the model. Just a shape, just a shadow, just enough to keep hope alive without feeding it. By winter, the case slowed. Detectives were reassigned. The evidence was boxed, labeled, and shelved. Emily Harper became a name in a file, a photo on a corkboard slowly curling at the edges. The house was sold. The street went back to normal, at least on the surface. But inside the community, something stayed broken. Parents walked their children to school longer than they needed to. Doors locked earlier. Conversations lowered when her name came up, as if speaking it too loudly might invite something back. Years passed. Technology advanced. DNA databases grew. Old evidence was re-examined, then returned to storage when it failed to speak. Each anniversary brought a brief spike of attention, a renewed appeal for information, a familiar plea from investigators who now sounded older, wearier, less certain. The case remained open, but only in theory. In practice, it slept. Until it didn't. In the spring of 2023, a routine audit of cold cases flagged Emily Harper's file. No reason. No tip. Just a checklist item in a system designed to make sure nothing was forgotten forever. A junior analyst noticed something small, almost invisible. A lab result from 2003 that had never been fully processed. A sample too degraded at the time to be useful. Technology had changed. So had the rules. The sample was sent back for testing, more out of obligation than expectation. The result came back 3 weeks later. It was a match. Not a name. Not yet. Just a hit. A connection to a profile entered into the system years after Emily died. Tied to a minor offense in another county. Another life, another story no one had thought to connect. The room went quiet when the email was read aloud. 20 years of silence cracked open. Just enough to let something through. An arrest was made quietly. No sirens. No cameras. Just a knock on a door in a town 2 hours away. A man in his mid-40s answering with a look that suggested he already knew why they were there. His name was withheld pending further investigation. Charges were filed. Statements were issued. The headline returned. Sharper this time, heavier. Texas 2003 cold case reopened. Arrest made after 20 years of silence. But an arrest is not an ending. It's a disturbance. And as the community learned, reopening a cold case doesn't just wake the past. It forces everyone to look at what they thought they knew and ask whether the truth had been standing nearby the entire time, unnoticed, waiting for the right moment to step forward. And somewhere in the evidence room, the rest of the file remained closed, patient, holding on to secrets it wasn't ready to give up. The arrest should have brought relief. That was the expectation, at least on paper. Closure. Resolution. A clean line drawn under a story that had bled quietly into the background of the town for 2 decades. But relief never came. Instead, the moment the handcuffs clicked shut, the questions multiplied, sharper than before, echoing through hallways that had grown used to silence. Because the man they arrested did not fit the story anyone remembered telling themselves. His name was Daniel Crow, 46 years old, divorced, no children, a warehouse supervisor in a neighboring county, the kind of job that keeps you off the radar and out of conversation. No violent felony record. No known connection to Emily Harper. No shared workplace, no shared friends, no obvious overlap that would make sense of his presence in her life, let alone her death. When detectives laid his name across the old case file, it didn't land neatly. It slid. It resisted. Crow's DNA had entered the system in 2011 after a misdemeanor assault charge stemming from a bar fight that never escalated beyond bruises and apologies. At the time, no one thought twice about it. Another profile in a growing database. Another dot waiting for a line that might never be drawn. 12 years later, that line appeared, thin but undeniable, stretching back to a hallway in Lubbock where blood had soaked into carpet fibers no one expected to matter again. When detectives sat Crow down for questioning, he didn't ask for a lawyer right away. He asked for water. He asked what year it was, then laughed, a short sound that didn't reach his eyes. He said he barely remembered 2003. He said everyone barely remembered 2003. He said he had lived a lot of life since then, most of it unremarkable, all of it ordinary. He denied knowing Emily Harper, denied ever setting foot in her house, denied everything with the calm of a man who had rehearsed being forgotten. The interview lasted 6 hours. No confession, no sleep, no dramatic moment where the truth spilled out under pressure. Just a steady insistence that this was a mistake, that science had finally gone too far, that 20 years was too long for certainty. Detectives left the room frustrated, carrying with them the unsettling realization that DNA could tell them who, but not why. And without why, the story remained incomplete, fragile, vulnerable to collapse. As news of the arrest spread, the community reacted not with celebration, but with caution. Some welcomed the development, clinging to the idea that justice delayed was still justice. Others felt something closer to dread, because reopening a cold case doesn't just reopen files. It reopens memories. Old arguments resurfaced. Old suspicions found new breath. People began revisiting conversations from years ago, wondering what they had missed, who they had trusted too easily, who they had dismissed too quickly. Emily Harper's parents were notified before the press release went out. They listened quietly as detectives explained the DNA match, the arrest, the next steps. They asked careful questions, technical questions, the kind that come from people who have learned, over time, not to expect miracles. When the call ended, they sat in their living room surrounded by photographs that had never aged, and waited for a feeling that didn't arrive. Because even now, nothing explained how Daniel Crow had entered Emily's life. Investigators went back to the beginning, slower this time, more suspicious of their own assumptions. They reread witness statements with new eyes. They re-examined timelines that had once seemed airtight, and cracks began to appear. The neighbor who heard the garage door close couldn't be certain anymore. The grocery store receipt placed Emily at the checkout, but not alone. A blurry figure appeared in the background of a security still, previously dismissed as meaningless. Now it was enlarged, enhanced, argued over late into the night. Crow's movements in 2003 were harder to track than expected. Employment records from that year were incomplete. Addresses overlapped. Paper trails thinned as they stretched backward. He had lived less than 15 miles from Emily at the time, a detail buried in old rental agreements no one had bothered to cross-reference before. 15 miles is nothing in Texas. It's close enough to matter, close enough to hide. Detectives canvassed Crow's past neighbors, his former co-workers, anyone who might remember him from that period. Memories came back fragmented, unreliable. Someone recalled him as quiet. Someone else remembered a temper. Another remembered nothing at all. He had been, by all accounts, forgettable, and that, investigators realized, might have been the most dangerous thing about him. Then there was the phone call. Back in 2003, Emily's phone records showed an incoming call the night she died. Unknown number. No voicemail. At the time, it was logged and dismissed, one of dozens of dead ends. Now, with Crow's name in play, technicians attempted to trace it again, using tools that didn't exist when the call first came in. The number led to a prepaid phone purchased with cash, activated 3 days before Emily's death, deactivated the morning after. No subscriber name, no billing address, just a thin digital ghost hovering at the edge of the case. Crow denied owning a prepaid phone, denied knowing anything about it. But denial had limits, and evidence has a way of pressing in from unexpected angles. Investigators found a receipt in an old storage box seized during a search of his property. Faded, crumpled, nearly thrown away. A purchase made in May 2003. A convenience store less than a mile from Emily's home. Still, nothing tied him directly to her. No emails, no letters, no witnesses who could place them in the same room or even the same conversation. The narrative refused to assemble itself cleanly, and as prosecutors prepared their case, a quiet fear settled in. What if this arrest wasn't the end of the mystery, but the beginning of a deeper one? Because cold cases have a way of doing that. They lure you in with the promise of answers, then remind you how much time can erase, distort, and protect.
Witness ist die. Memoris rot.
Evidence degrades, and sometimes, the truth survives only in pieces, scattered across years no one thought to connect. As the court date approached, pressure mounted. Media scrutiny intensified. Headlines grew bolder, less careful. Cold case solved, some declared prematurely. Others hedged, adding question marks like safety nets. Inside the investigation, confidence wavered. Detectives began to ask questions they hadn't dared ask before. Could there have been someone else? Could Crow have acted alone? Could the DNA have arrived through means no one had considered? And hovering over everything was the most unsettling possibility of all. That even now, with an arrest made and a suspect named, Emily Harper's story was still unfinished. Because in the evidence room, beneath layers of dust and documentation, there remained items no one had fully explained. A missing shoe, an unidentified fiber, a footprint that didn't match any pair found in the house. Small things, easy to overlook, impossible to ignore. The silence that had lasted 20 years had been broken. But what spilled out wasn't clarity. It was noise. And the deeper investigators pushed into that noise, the clearer it became that this cold case wasn't just reopening. It was resisting. The missing shoe became the obsession no one wanted to admit to out loud. It sat in an evidence bag for 20 years, labeled, logged, photographed, and quietly ignored. A simple women's flat, size 7, scuffed at the heel, the kind of shoe Emily Harper wore to work every day. His twin was found on her foot. This one was not. At the time, investigators assumed it had come off during the struggle, kicked under furniture, lost in the chaos. But it was never found inside the house. Not under the bed. Not in the closet. Not outside. Not anywhere within the perimeter. Which meant someone had taken it. Or she had. When the case reopened, the shoe was re-examined under lights brighter than those used in 2003, by hands trained to see details others missed. The sole showed traces of dirt inconsistent with Emily's yard. The pattern didn't match the soil around her home, or the school where she worked, or the grocery store she visited that afternoon. It was a different kind of dirt, coarser, industrial, the kind you find near loading docks and warehouses. Daniel Crow worked at a warehouse. That connection felt too convenient, too clean. Investigators had learned to distrust coincidences. They sent the sample for analysis anyway, comparing it to soil from Crow's workplace, from routes he might have taken, from places he claimed to frequent. The results came back inconclusive. Similar but not identical. Enough to raise eyebrows. Not enough to hold a case together. Meanwhile, Crow remained silent. He stopped answering questions. His lawyer spoke for him now, issuing statements about presumption of innocence and unreliable memories. The man who had once seemed almost eager to explain himself had retreated behind legal language and closed doors. From the outside, it looked like strategy. From the inside, it felt like fear. As prosecutors prepared for trial, they ran headlong into a problem no amount of preparation could fix: motive. They had none. No history between Crow and Emily.
No documenti di interaction.
No reason, emotional or financial, that made sense. Jurors could understand rage, jealousy, greed. They struggled with randomness. And the idea that Emily Harper had been killed by a man she may not have known at all was a story that felt unfinished, unsatisfying, dangerously thin. So investigators went looking for a connection where none had been obvious before. They started with Emily's routine, the unremarkable patterns of an unremarkable life. Work, home, grocery store, church, repeat. And slowly, almost reluctantly, something emerged. A place she passed every day but never mentioned. A shortcut she took to avoid traffic. An industrial strip just outside town, lined with warehouses, repair shops, and convenience stores. One of those stores matched the receipt found in Crow's storage box. Emily had stopped there more than once. Security footage from 2003 was long gone, overwritten and destroyed, but transaction logs remained. Dates, times, nothing personal. Just proof that two lives had crossed paths in the most ordinary way possible. No conversation recorded. No memory preserved. Just proximity. Just opportunity. Witnesses were harder to find. 20 years had thinned the herd. Some had moved. Some had died. Some remembered things differently now, their memories reshaped by headlines and hindsight. One former cashier thought she remembered a man lingering near Emily once, watching her as she left. Another wasn't sure if that memory was real or something she had invented after hearing about the arrest. Investigators wrote everything down, marking certainty in pencil, doubt in ink. Then there was the footprint. Back in 2003, technicians had photographed a partial shoe impression near the back door, just outside the frame of the crime scene photos most people remembered. It didn't match Emily's shoes. It didn't match anything found in the house. At the time, it was chalked up to contamination. A first responder, a neighbor, anyone. Now, with fresh eyes, the print was scanned, digitized, compared against databases that didn't exist when it was first discovered. The pattern matched a work boot sold in limited quantities in the early 2000s, primarily to industrial suppliers. Crow owned a similar pair. Not the same size. Not the same wear pattern. Similar. Again, similar but not identical. Again, just enough to suggest something without proving anything. The case began to feel like it was built out of shadows. Pressure mounted from all sides. The Harper family wanted answers, not maybes. The community wanted closure, not questions. Prosecutors wanted certainty, not probability. And detectives, caught in the middle, felt the familiar dread of a case slipping through their fingers for a second time. That's when the letter arrived. No return address. Postmarked from a town 60 miles away. Typed,
no fingerprints, no signature.
Just a few paragraphs, carefully worded, addressed to the district attorney's office. It didn't confess. It didn't accuse. It asked questions. Questions only someone close to the case would know to ask. About the missing shoe. About the phone call. About a detail from the autopsy that had never been released to the public. The letter suggested Crow hadn't acted alone. It hinted at another presence that night. Another set of footsteps. Another voice in the house. It didn't name anyone. It didn't explain why. It simply warned that focusing on one man would leave the truth buried, just like it had been for 20 years. Investigators traced the letter as best they could. The paper was generic. The printer unremarkable. The phrasing careful, neutral, almost clinical. Could have been a hoax. Could have been a coincidence. Or it could have been the sound of someone losing patience. When Crow was asked about the letter, he said nothing. He stared at the table. His lawyer ended the interview early. The trial date was postponed. More time requested. More evidence sought. The headlines shifted again. Uncertainty creeping back into the language. Cold case question, some read. New doubts emerge, others warned. The public, once hopeful, grew restless. The idea that the arrest might not lead to answers felt like a second betrayal. And then, quietly, without ceremony, the prosecution made a decision. They would proceed. They would tell the story as they had it, imperfect as it was, and trust that the weight of time, science, and circumstance would be enough. because waiting for perfection meant waiting forever. And Emily Harper had already waited too long. But as opening statements approached, one final discovery threatened to upend everything. A review of Crow's phone records from 2003 revealed a number he had called repeatedly in the weeks leading up to Emily's death. The number belonged to a man who had never been interviewed, a man who had worked nights, a man who had owned a truck matching the vague description given by a neighbor 20 years earlier, a man who had moved away 2 months after the murder. The silence, it seemed, had not been as empty as everyone thought, and somewhere in the distance, the truth shifted, unsettled, preparing to surface in ways no one was ready for. The man connected to the number was named Raymond Pike, and the moment his name surfaced, the room went quiet in a way that felt different from before. This wasn't the silence of missing evidence or unanswered questions. This was recognition, not familiarity exactly, but friction, as if two pieces of a puzzle had finally scraped against each other after years of floating apart. Pike was 51 now, former night shift mechanic, lived alone, no criminal record worth flagging. In 2003, he worked less than a mile from Emily Harper's neighborhood, servicing industrial vehicles through the night, clocking out just before dawn. He owned a dark pickup truck, not unusual in Texas, but the details settled uncomfortably alongside everything else. When detectives pulled his old file, thin, nearly empty, they realized something unsettling. His name had come up once before, not prominently, not enough to demand attention, just a mention, buried in an early tip from a neighbor who reported a truck idling near the street sometime after sunset. At the time, the lead went nowhere. Pike had been working that night, according to records. End of story. Except records lie. Or rather, they simplify. They flatten reality into something manageable, something clean. When investigators tracked Pike down and knocked on his door, he answered slowly, as if he'd been expecting it. He didn't ask why they were there. He didn't pretend confusion. He just nodded and stepped aside, letting them into a house that smelled faintly of oil and dust, the past clinging to the walls like residue. The interview started politely. Routine questions. Where were you in 2003? Did you know Emily Harper? Have you ever met Daniel Crow? Pike answered carefully, each word measured, his tone calm but guarded. He said he didn't know Emily, said he'd heard about the case like everyone else, said Crow was an old acquaintance, nothing more. Someone you talk to when the night gets long and the work gets dull. Someone you lose touch with. But when detectives asked about the phone calls, his composure shifted. Not dramatically, just enough. A pause. A glance toward the window. He said he didn't remember. Said 20 years was a long time. Said people talked more back then. No texts. No apps. Just calls. Lots of calls. Meaningless calls. The problem was the timing. The calls spiked in the weeks before Emily's death, then stopped abruptly. No calls after. None at all. It was as if a conversation had ended suddenly, permanently. Pike denied any involvement, denied knowing anything that could help, denied everything in a way that felt practiced, not panicked. When the interview ended, detectives left with nothing concrete and the unmistakable feeling that they had just brushed against something solid without quite grasping it. Back at the office, they laid out the timeline again, this time with Pike included. Crow, Pike, Emily. 3 lives moving independently until, somehow, they converged on one night in 2003. The question wasn't just how. It was why. And more importantly, who knew what and when. The anonymous letter resurfaced in everyone's mind. Another presence. Another set of footsteps. Another voice. Had Pike written it? Had Crow? Or was there someone else entirely, watching the investigation from a distance, growing uneasy as the walls began to close in? Forensic accountants were brought in to examine Pike's financial history. Nothing obvious.
No sudden windfalls. No suspicious transfers.
But there were gaps. Periods where cash appeared and disappeared without explanation. Not enough to prove anything. Enough to raise an eyebrow. Then came the warehouse. Investigators revisited Crow's old workplace. Now under different ownership, its floors resurfaced, its walls repainted. But some things endure. Old loading docks, drainage channels, areas where dirt accumulates and stays. Soil samples were taken, compared again to the traces found on Emily's missing shoe. This time, the results leaned closer. Still not definitive, but closer. The missing shoe began to feel less like an afterthought and more like a message. If Emily had left the house alive, even briefly, it meant the story everyone had accepted was wrong. It meant the struggle didn't end in the hallway. It meant movement, transport, a decision made under pressure. And that decision implied more than one person. As the theory shifted, so did the narrative prosecutors were preparing. No longer a lone attacker. Now, the possibility of coordination, assistance, someone waiting, someone watching the street, someone ready to help clean up, cover tracks, disappear. But building that case required more than speculation. It required proof. And proof, after 20 years, is a fragile thing. The defense moved quickly. Motions filed. Evidence challenged. The anonymous letter dismissed as hearsay. The soil analysis questioned. The phone records framed as coincidence. The argument was simple and effective. Time corrupts certainty. Memory lies. Technology changes. And no one should be condemned based on fragments stitched together decades later. The judge listened. The courtroom watched. The Harper family sat quietly, absorbing each exchange with the numb focus of people who had learned to survive disappointment. Then, unexpectedly, a new witness came forward. A woman in her late 60s, living in a retirement community outside Austin, contacted investigators after seeing a news segment about the case. In 2003, she had lived near Emily Harper Street. She had never spoken to police. She said she didn't think what she saw mattered. She said she wasn't even sure it was real. She remembered waking up that night, remembered a sound, an engine revving softly, remembered looking out her window and seeing a dark pickup parked with its lights off. And she remembered something else, a figure walking away from the house, not running, not panicking, carrying something small, light-colored. At the time, she went back to bed. Now, 20 years later, the memory refused to stay buried. The defense immediately attacked her credibility. Memory decay, media influence, suggestibility, all the usual weapons. But her statement added weight where there had only been air. Another piece sliding into place, imperfect but undeniable. As the trial loomed closer, the atmosphere around the case grew heavier. Less certainty, more fear. Because the deeper investigators dug, the clearer it became that this wasn't just about solving a murder. It was about confronting the possibility that the truth had been visible all along, and that no one had wanted to see it. And somewhere, whether in a quiet house or a crowded room, someone who had stayed silent for 20 years began to realize that silence was no longer protection. It was a liability. Pressure does strange things to memory. It sharpens some edges and erases others, bending the past into shapes that feel useful, survivable. As the case tightened around Daniel Crowe and Raymond Pike, the town felt it too, an invisible hand closing slowly, methodically, squeezing secrets that had been dormant for decades. The woman from Austin became Exhibit A in a new theory the prosecution didn't fully trust but could no longer ignore. Her statement was reread, dissected, reduced to syllables. The object she remembered, light-colored, small, was never identified. But in the quiet spaces between testimony and cross-examination, everyone thought the same thing. The shoe. If someone had carried it away, it wasn't an accident. It wasn't panic. It was intention. And intention implies awareness of evidence, of consequence, of what mattered and what could be erased. Crowe's lawyer argued that the shoe meant nothing, that people drop things during trauma, that neighbors misremember, that the human mind fills gaps with symbolism when faced with uncertainty. Pike's lawyer echoed the sentiment, emphasizing the lack of physical evidence tying his client to the scene. Two defenses, separate but aligned, each relying on the same truth. The past is fragile. Inside the investigation team, frustration simmered. They had DNA but not a story. They had witnesses but not certainty. And they had two men linked by proximity and phone calls, but no clear moment where lines crossed irrevocably. Then a technician noticed something everyone else had missed. The prepaid phone. The number that called Emily the night she died had been deactivated the next morning. At the time, it seemed like a clean break, a digital disappearance. But when analysts looked closer, they found activity that hadn't been visible before. The phone had pinged off a tower near Crow's warehouse that evening. And later, after midnight, it pinged again, near Pike's residence. 2 locations. 1 device. Movement. It wasn't enough to prove who held the phone. But it proved the phone had traveled. And that travel traced a path no one could easily explain away. When confronted with the new data, Pike changed his story. Just slightly. He admitted he'd loaned Crow a phone once. Just once. Said Crow claimed his own wasn't working. Said it was no big deal. Said people didn't think about these things back then. Crow denied it. Flatly. Said he'd never used Pike's phone. Said he barely remembered Pike at all. The contradiction didn't explode. It simmered. It sat between them like a live wire, waiting for the wrong word to touch it. As the prosecution adjusted its approach, a darker possibility emerged. What if Emily wasn't targeted? What if she was a witness? What if she had seen something she wasn't meant to see? Somewhere along her routine route, somewhere ordinary enough to feel safe until it wasn't. Investigators revisited old police logs from the industrial strip. Minor thefts, vandalism, reports that went nowhere. One incident stood out. A break-in at a storage facility 3 weeks before Emily's death. Tools stolen. No suspects identified. Crow had been working nights nearby. Pike's truck had been spotted in the area. Still, nothing tied Emily to that event. Nothing except timing. And timing, in cold cases, has a way of becoming motive when nothing else will. As jury selection began, tension thickened. Prospective jurors were questioned about their ability to set aside emotion, to weigh evidence objectively. Many said yes. Few sounded convincing. The phrase reasonable doubt hung in the air like a warning, not a standard. Emily's parents sat through it all, faces composed, hands folded, absorbing each development with the weary resilience of people who had learned to live with unfinished sentences. They had stopped hoping for closure. Now they wanted honesty, whatever shape it took. The prosecution's opening statement was careful. No declarations of certainty. No promises of revelation. Just a story about 2 men, a series of choices, and a night that spiraled out of control. The defense followed with equal restraint, framing the case as a cautionary tale about the dangers of hindsight and the seduction of narrative. And beneath it all, the evidence waited. The footprint, the soil, the phone, the shoe, each piece incomplete on its own. Together, they suggested something messy, unplanned, human. A confrontation that escalated. A mistake compounded by fear. And afterward, a pact of silence sealed not by loyalty, but by mutual vulnerability. As testimony unfolded, small details took on new weight. A coworker recalled Crow leaving work early that night. Not unheard of, just unusual. A former neighbor remembered Pike cleaning his truck obsessively the following morning. Not suspicious on its own. But patterns don't announce themselves. They reveal themselves slowly, reluctantly. The defense objected. Frequently. Successfully. Evidence was limited. Context stripped away. The case narrowed until it felt like it might collapse under its own caution. Then, unexpectedly, Crow broke. Not in court. Not publicly. But in a holding room, late one evening, after another day of testimony that had circled him without landing. He asked to speak to investigators. Alone. What he said wasn't a confession. It was something slipperier. He admitted knowing Emily. Admitted seeing her more than once. Not socially. Not personally. He said she had come by the warehouse once, asking for directions after getting lost. He said they talked. Briefly. He said nothing happened. It was a story no one had heard before. When asked why he hadn't mentioned it earlier, Crow stared at the floor and said, "Because it didn't matter, until it did." Investigators left the room with the unsettling awareness that they had just been handed another fragment. Another version. Another truth competing for space. And as the trial pressed on, one thing became impossible to ignore. The silence that had protected this case for 20 years wasn't empty. It was crowded. Crowded with half-truths, with choices made in fear, with moments no one thought would matter long enough to be remembered. And now, with the walls closing in and the past refusing to stay buried, that silence was beginning to fracture, audibly, irreversibly, into something far more dangerous than noise. It was becoming testimony. Crow's admission landed like a dull thud. Not loud, not explosive, just heavy. The kind of sound that settles into the room and refuses to leave. Knowing Emily changed everything, and at the same time explained almost nothing. A chance encounter, a brief conversation, directions given, then forgotten. That was the story Crow offered, and on the surface it sounded harmless. Ordinary, the kind of interaction that happens every day without consequence. But ordinary stories don't wait 20 years to be told. Investigators pressed him. When exactly did he see her? What did she ask? How did she act? Crow's answers came slower now, less rehearsed. He said it was late afternoon. Said she seemed nervous, distracted. Said she mentioned being late, though he couldn't remember late for what. Each detail felt pulled from the past with effort, like something half-buried and resistant. Then came the question he didn't expect. Why did Emily have your phone number? Crow froze. The prepaid phone was placed on the table between them, not physically but conceptually. A ghost made solid through data points and timestamps. Crow shook his head. Said he didn't remember giving it to her. Said maybe she wrote it down without asking. Said maybe Pike gave it to her. The answers stacked up quickly, poorly, each one weaker than the last. When investigators brought Pike back in, the tone shifted. Less patience. Less neutrality. They told him Crow had admitted knowing Emily. Told him the phone records placed the prepaid device near both of them that night. Told him witnesses were coming forward. Pike listened, arms crossed, jaw tight. He didn't interrupt. He didn't argue. He just asked one question. What happens if I tell you something now? That question changed the temperature in the room. Negotiations followed. Lawyers were called. Statements were drafted and revised. Hours passed. And finally, carefully, cautiously, Pike spoke. He said Emily came to the warehouse twice. Not once. Said she was lost the first time, like Crow claimed. The second time, she wasn't lost. She was angry. Said she accused Crow of following her, of calling her, of making her uncomfortable. Pike said he was there that night. Said he heard raised voices. Said he told Crow to let it go. He said he didn't think Crow would. According to Pike, the night Emily died wasn't planned. It was impulsive. Crow had driven to her house to talk. Pike said he followed in his truck, worried things might get out of hand. He said he stayed outside. Said he never went in. Said he heard shouting, then a sound like something heavy hitting the floor. He said he panicked. Pike admitted to helping afterward. Admitted to driving Crow away. Admitted to disposing of items he didn't want to know too much about. But he denied touching Emily. Denied intending harm. Denied murder. It wasn't a clean confession. It was a survival confession. Carefully framed. Narrow. Designed to shift weight without taking it fully. Crow's response was immediate and furious. He denied Pike's version entirely. Said Pike was lying to save himself. Said Pike was the one who pushed things too far. Said Pike came inside the house. Said Pike struck her. 2 men. 2 stories. 1 dead woman. The prosecution recalculated overnight. Charges were amended. Deals considered. The narrative fractured into competing truths, each pointing just far enough away from the speaker to be useful. And through it all, Emily remained voiceless. Forensic reanalysis followed Pike's statement. The bloodstain patterns were reviewed again. The angle of impact reconsidered. 1 blow, maybe 2. The shoe missing now made a different kind of sense, not as a trophy, but as a mistake, something grabbed in haste, something that later became dangerous to keep. The shoe was never found. The jury listened as experts explained probabilities, scenarios, reconstructions. Diagrams filled screens. Words like likely and consistent with did heavy lifting they were never designed to do. The defense pounced on every uncertainty. The prosecution leaned on cumulative weight. No single piece proved guilt. Together, they argued they told the only story that fit. But juries don't decide what fits best. They decide what fits well enough. As deliberations approached, tension inside the courthouse thickened into something almost physical. Reporters whispered. Families avoided eye contact. Crow stared straight ahead. Pike kept his head down. Both men looked smaller than they had weeks earlier, reduced by time, by consequence, by the slow realization that silence had only delayed this moment, not prevented it. When closing arguments ended, the jury disappeared behind closed doors. Hours passed, then days. Notes were sent back, questions asked, clarifications requested. Each delay tightened nerves, stretched hope thin. And in that waiting, a truth settled over everyone involved. No verdict could undo what had been done. No answer could restore what was lost. The best anyone could hope for now was alignment, between evidence and belief, between law and memory, between what could be proven and what would forever remain suspected. When the jury finally returned, the courtroom stood. The foreperson's voice shook as the verdicts were read. Guilty on some counts, not guilty on others. Relief and devastation crossed faces in equal measure. Sentencing would come later. Appeals would follow. Arguments would continue. The legal process, meticulous and imperfect, would grind on. But outside the courthouse, as cameras flashed and statements were issued, the community felt something shift. Not closure, not peace, exhaustion. Because even now, even with convictions and confessions and headlines declaring progress, the case resisted being neatly resolved. Too many gaps, too many maybes, too many moments lost to time. Emily Harper's name was no longer just a cold case reference. It was a reminder of how ordinary lives can intersect in dangerous ways, of how silence can masquerade as safety, of how truth, when delayed long enough, arrives damaged. And as night fell on the town once again, there was a quiet understanding shared by those who had followed the case from the beginning. This story was never really about who was arrested. It was about how long the truth can wait, and what it costs when it finally decides not to anymore. Sentencing did not bring the noise people expected. There were no outbursts, no dramatic collapses, just the low murmur of procedure and the rustle of paper as the court shifted from questions of guilt to questions of consequence. Years were discussed like units of measurement, stacked carefully, argued precisely, as if time itself could be calibrated to match the weight of what had been taken. Crow was sentenced first. The judge's voice was steady, almost detached, reading from a document that reduced a lifetime to dates and statutes. Pike followed, his punishment lighter, negotiated down through cooperation, framed as accountability rather than absolution. The difference between them sparked immediate backlash. Comment sections erupted. Editorials questioned morality disguised as legality. The word justice was used often, rarely defined. Outside, Emily Harper's parents stood before microphones they no longer trusted. They thanked investigators. They thanked the jury. They said they were relieved. They said they were tired. Every sentence carried an unspoken truth. This was not the ending they had imagined in the long nights when hope still felt possible, because something still didn't sit right. In the weeks after sentencing, detectives continued working quietly, not because they were required to, but because the case refused to leave them alone. There were loose threads they couldn't stop seeing, details that didn't align perfectly, no matter how often they were revisited. The kind of inconsistencies that don't overturn verdicts but haunt the people who found them. One of those details lived in the autopsy report. The blunt force trauma that killed Emily had always been described in general terms. One fatal impact, possibly two. But when a forensic pathologist reviewed the report again years later with fresh eyes and no pressure of an active trial, she noticed something subtle. The injury pattern suggested 2 points of contact. Not simultaneous, sequential. One blow delivered with hesitation, the other with certainty. That didn't fit either man's story. Crow described a confrontation that escalated too quickly. Pike described chaos, panic, a single terrible moment. Neither accounted for the pause implied by the injuries, a pause long enough for someone to decide. The finding was logged, not challenged, not acted upon, just added to the quiet archive of things that might matter someday. Then there was the neighbor's call. The dispatcher's recording from 2003 had been played so many times it had lost its edges. Static, breathing, a cut-off sentence no one could reconstruct with confidence. But a new audio analyst working on unrelated cases flagged it during a training review. The breathing pattern was irregular, labored, not consistent with someone in immediate physical distress. It sounded like someone trying not to be heard. The analyst suggested the caller may not have been the victim at all. The implication landed softly, but it landed. If Emily hadn't made the call, then who had? And why call at all only to hang up? To test the line? To create confusion? To establish a false timeline? There was no way to prove it now. The phone was gone. The voice unidentified. But the possibility reopened a door everyone had assumed was sealed. And once that door cracked, other questions followed. Why was the front door open when police arrived? Why had nothing of value been taken? Why did the scene feel paused rather than interrupted? Why did certain objects appear moved, repositioned almost deliberately? These weren't questions for a courtroom anymore. They were questions for memory, for conscience, for the quiet spaces where certainty gives way to doubt. Pike was contacted again. Through his attorney. Informally, he declined to add to his statement. Crow did the same. Both men had learned the cost of speaking. Both understood that ambiguity, at this stage, was safer than truth. The media moved on as it always does. New cases, new names, new tragedies. The Harper story faded from headlines, replaced by fresher grief. But in the town it lingered, in conversations lowered mid-sentence, in parents' glances toward the street when their children were late coming home, in the way people spoke about 2003 not as a year but as a turning point. Emily's house was sold again, renovated, repainted. The hallway where the bloodstain once darkened the floor now held framed art and a runner rug. Life reasserted itself, quietly, stubbornly. But some neighbors swore the porch light still flickered at night, even after the wiring was replaced. Stories grow in those conditions. Stories and doubts. A former juror later admitted, anonymously, that the verdict had felt necessary rather than certain. That they had weighed silence against imperfection and chosen the version of events that asked the least of them emotionally. That doesn't make the verdict wrong. It makes it human. And that may be the most unsettling truth of all. Because cold cases don't end when a gavel falls. They end when belief settles. And belief, once shaken, rarely returns to its original shape. Emily Harper's name now lived in two places at once. In legal records, marked resolved. And in the collective memory of a town that understood, deep down, that resolution and understanding are not the same thing. Some nights, detectives still drove past the old street. Not on assignment, just out of habit, out of something unfinished. They looked at the houses, the quiet, the ordinary calm, and wondered how many truths move through spaces like these without ever being seen. The case had spoken, but it had not said everything. And in the long silence that followed, one question remained, uncomfortably alive, refusing to fade with time. What if the truth had only been partially heard? Time moved forward the way it always does, indifferently, efficiently, carrying the case with it whether anyone wanted that or not. Files were archived, evidence sealed, names entered into databases under columns marked closed. On paper, Emily Harper's story had reached its conclusion. In reality, it had only changed shape. The first crack came from a place no one expected. A former dispatcher, retired and restless, spent her evenings organizing old recordings for a local historical project. She had worked the night shift in 2003. Not on Emily's call, that much she was certain of, but on enough similar nights to recognize patterns. When she heard about the audio analyst's doubts, she requested a copy of the recording. Not officially, quietly, out of curiosity. She listened to it alone, headphones on, volume high. What caught her attention wasn't the breathing. It was the pause before the line went dead. A fraction of a second. A hesitation. In her experience, callers in distress didn't hesitate like that. They clung. They pleaded. This pause felt different. Deliberate. Like someone deciding whether to finish a thought they had already started. She said it sounded like a man holding his breath. The observation went nowhere. There was no mechanism to reopen the case on that basis. No authority to act. Just another note, shared privately with a former detective who listened, nodded, and added it to his growing list of things he couldn't forget. That detective, years later, would admit that what troubled him most wasn't what had been said during the investigation, but what hadn't. The moments when people answered too quickly, when stories aligned just enough to feel cooperative, when fear masqueraded as clarity. Crow and Pike had given statements that overlapped conveniently. Their versions contradicted each other where it mattered, but agreed on one thing. The violence had been contained. An argument, a mistake, a moment that spiraled. It was a narrative that asked the least from everyone involved. From the jury, from the community, from the system. But the house itself had told a different story. Crime scene photographs, revisited late one night by a new investigator assigned to cold case review training, revealed something subtle. A chair in the kitchen slightly out of place. A scuff mark near the back door that didn't match any known shoe. A window unlocked, but not forced. Details too small to change verdicts. Too persistent to ignore. A suggested movement. Not chaos. Not a sudden eruption. But a sequence. People repositioning themselves. Decisions being made. The missing shoe fit into that pattern. So did the open door. So did the absence of any attempt to steal or stage. It wasn't a burglary gone wrong. It wasn't random violence. It was something narrower, more specific, and that specificity demanded intention. Emily's co-workers were contacted again, informally, for a documentary project years after the trial. Most declined. One agreed. Off camera. She spoke about Emily's last weeks at work. About how she'd seemed distracted. About how she'd asked if anyone else ever felt watched walking to their car. At the time, they'd laughed it off. Small town nerves. True crime in the news. Nothing real. Now, the comment landed differently. Emily hadn't reported anyone. Not to police. Not to supervisors. She hadn't wanted to make a fuss. That restraint, that instinct to minimize, suddenly felt dangerous in retrospect. Not because it caused what happened, but because it left no record. No early warning. No trail. The idea that Emily may have recognized a threat before it became visible reframed everything. It suggested that the events of that night weren't spontaneous. That they were the end of something already in motion. Pike's partial confession, once seen as cooperation, began to look like control. By admitting to just enough, he had shaped the boundaries of inquiry. Crow's denials did the same from the opposite direction. Between them, a corridor of acceptable truth had formed, narrow but navigable, leading to convictions without requiring full exposure. And outside that corridor, unanswered questions waited patiently. A journalist picked up the thread years later, not for a breaking story, but for a long-form piece on unresolved doubt. She interviewed former jurors, investigators, neighbors. She asked the question no one had formally asked in court. Who made the call? The answers varied. Some said Emily. Some said Crow, trying to test whether police were already alerted. Some said Pike, nervous, indecisive. No one could prove anything. But the consensus was telling. No one was sure. That uncertainty was the story. Because certainty had always been the currency of the case. The thing everyone wanted, needed, demanded. When it finally arrived, it had been accepted gratefully, even though it didn't quite fit. Even though it left gaps wide enough for doubt to breathe. The journalist's piece never accused. It didn't name a new suspect. It didn't call for appeals. It simply laid out the fractures. The pauses. The things that didn't align perfectly when viewed without the urgency of trial. The response was muted. thoughtful, uncomfortable. People shared it quietly, late at night, reading it the way you read something you're not sure you want to believe. Emily Harper's parents read it too. They didn't comment publicly. They had learned the cost of that. Privately, they acknowledged what they had always felt but never said. That answers and truth are not synonyms. That the system had done what it could with what it had. And that something somewhere still didn't add up. They visited Emily's grave more often after that. Not out of grief, they had lived with that long enough, but out of presence. A way of saying that being remembered didn't depend on resolution. As years continued to pass, the case settled into a strange afterlife. Taught in criminal justice courses as an example of delayed evidence. Referenced in podcasts as a cautionary tale. Remembered locally as the night everything changed. And in the quiet moments, when the town slept and the industrial strip lay empty, there was a lingering sense that the story had not finished speaking. Only that it had lowered its voice. And that those who listened closely could still hear it. Moving through memory, through doubt, through the uncomfortable space between what was proven and what was true. Long after the courtroom emptied and the cameras packed up, the case continued its quiet migration into places no verdict could reach. It surfaced in lecture halls, in podcast scripts, in the careful language of legal journals dissecting what time does to evidence and what evidence does to belief. But its most persistent presence remained local, embedded in the routines of people who had lived through it and never quite left it behind. A former detective kept the file on his shelf at home. Not officially, just copies, notes, margins filled with questions that had never made it into reports. He told himself it was professional curiosity. The truth was simpler. He couldn't stop thinking about the night call came in. The open door, the quiet house, the feeling that something had already moved on before anyone arrived. Years later, when he listened again to the dispatcher recording, what struck him wasn't the breathing or the cut-off sentence. It was the absence of urgency. The caller hadn't been running out of time. They had been controlling it. That detail aligned with something else that had always bothered him. The lack of forced entry. Emily had let someone in. Or the door had been open because it didn't need to be closed. Because whoever was inside felt entitled to be there, at least for a moment. That sense of entitlement doesn't come from nowhere. It grows, quietly, in proximity, in repeated encounters that never rise to the level of reportable threat until they do. Crow's admission that he had met Emily at the warehouse now took on new weight. Not as an isolated incident, but as part of a pattern that never fully surfaced. 2 encounters, maybe more. A woman growing uneasy. A man misreading attention as invitation. Another man watching, enabling, rationalizing. That theory fit the facts better than anyone wanted to admit. But theories don't overturn convictions. They just linger. The journalist who had written the long-form piece received an email months later from an anonymous account. It didn't accuse. It didn't confess. It asked a single question. Did you ever find out what was in the garage? The question made no sense at first. The garage had been searched, cataloged, cleared. Nothing unusual. But when she forwarded it to a former investigator, his reaction was immediate. He remembered something, a detail dismissed at the time as irrelevant. The garage door opener. Emily's opener was found inside the house, on the kitchen counter, which meant the garage door had likely been opened manually, or by someone else, someone with access, someone who didn't need to be invited in through the front. The garage itself had shown signs of recent use. Tire marks, oil stains, nothing suspicious in isolation, but paired with the idea of movement, of transfer, of someone arriving and leaving without drawing attention, it added another layer to an already crowded picture. The anonymous email was never answered. It vanished into the digital void it came from, but it did what it was meant to do. It reopened a mental door. Speculation followed quietly, not publicly, in private conversations between people who had earned the right to doubt. Could someone have waited in the garage? Could the confrontation have started there, out of sight, out of earshot? Could the house have been a secondary location, not the origin of violence? The missing shoe carried away suddenly made more sense in that context. Not a random item lost in chaos, but something displaced during movement. A trace of transit rather than struggle. Crow and Pike both denied being in the garage. Both said the argument happened inside. Both had reason to minimize their presence elsewhere. Both had reason to align their stories where it mattered most. And so the case settled into its final, most uncomfortable form. A story with an ending that explained enough to function, but not enough to satisfy. In public records, Emily Harper's case was solved. In memory, it remained open. That duality followed her name everywhere. When new cold cases were discussed, hers was mentioned as a success story, a testament to persistence and technology. But among those who knew it best, it was referenced with a pause. A qualifier, a look that suggested agreement without conviction. Technology would continue to evolve. Audio analysis would improve. Databases would grow. It was possible, likely even, that one day something new would surface. A clearer voice pattern, a forgotten record, a digital footprint overlooked by earlier systems. But time doesn't just reveal truth. It erases the people who can recognize it when it appears. Witnesses age. Investigators retire. Context dissolves. What remains is interpretation. Emily's parents understood that better than anyone. They stopped attending events about the case. Stopped giving interviews. They focused on remembering Emily as she was, not as she became in headlines and arguments. They planted a tree in her name at the edge of town, away from cameras, away from discussion. Sometimes strangers left flowers there. Sometimes they didn't. And in those quiet moments, the case felt closest to what it truly was. Not a puzzle to be solved, but a life interrupted, surrounded by human decisions that rippled outward long after the moment passed. The final truth of what happened in that house in 2003 may never be fully known. Not because it's hidden, but because it's fragmented, split across memories, motives, and moments no one thought would matter until they did. Cold cases don't always end in revelation. Sometimes they end in acceptance. An acceptance that justice, truth, and understanding are not always aligned. An acceptance that silence can be broken without being resolved. And an acceptance that some stories continue, not because they are unfinished, but because they refuse to be simplified. By the time the case reached its 20th year since reopening, it had shed most of its urgency and gained something heavier in return: permanence. It no longer lived in the present tense. It existed as a fixed reference point, a story people used to explain how things could go wrong without anyone noticing until it was too late. In law schools, it was cited as an example of delayed justice complicated by partial truth. In police training rooms, it was discussed as a reminder that evidence ages, but assumptions age faster. The same phrase appeared again and again in different contexts, spoken with a kind of resigned respect. This one was complicated. Complicated was a gentle word for it. The men convicted in connection with Emily Harper's death settled into their new lives behind walls and routines designed to erase individuality. Crow filed appeals. Some were dismissed quickly. Others lingered. His filings avoided emotion, focusing instead on procedure, on the reliability of evidence collected decades after the fact. Pike, having accepted his deal, disappeared from public attention entirely.
No interviews. No statements.
No attempts at redemption. Silence once again became the safest option. But silence has a way of leaking. A corrections officer at Crow's facility later told an investigator, off the record, that Crow talked in his sleep. Not coherently, not confessionally, just fragments, names, half-sentences, a recurring phrase that made no sense on its own. She shouldn't have followed. There was no way to contextualize it, no way to verify it. The officer mentioned it once, then never again. It became another entry in the informal archive of things that unsettled but proved nothing. Meanwhile, the tree planted in Emily's name grew steadily at the edge of town. It became a landmark of sorts, a quiet one. People walked past it without knowing why it was there, then learned, then slowed their steps. Teachers brought classes there on the anniversary, not to discuss the crime, but to talk about memory. about how absence changes a place. Emily's story had outgrown the details of her death. It had become something else entirely. That transformation carried risk. As years passed, speculation hardened into unofficial canon. People repeated theories as if they were facts. The idea of a third person present that night circulated freely, untethered from evidence, fueled by discomfort with the official narrative. In trying to keep the story alive, parts of it drifted away from truth altogether. The irony was sharp. A case once starved for attention now risked being consumed by it. A retired judge who had observed portions of the trial offered a quiet reflection in an interview years later. He said the hardest cases weren't the ones with missing evidence, but the ones with too much of it. Because abundance creates choice, and choice creates doubt. This case had offered many choices. Believe the DNA, believe the confessions, believe the witnesses, or believe the spaces between them. No system is built to weigh absence. It is built to measure presence. And presence, in Emily Harper's case, had arrived late, damaged, and incomplete. As the final appeal was denied, a legal end was reached at last. The books were closed again, this time with more weight behind the closure. No further motions, no remaining avenues. The case was, in every formal sense, finished. What followed was not relief, but a kind of quiet grief. Not just for Emily, but for the idea that truth, once pursued long enough, always reveals itself cleanly. Some cases don't grant that courtesy. They leave behind echoes instead. Echoes of conversations that might have mattered, of instincts dismissed, of warnings unspoken, echoes that move through time, changing shape but never fully disappearing. On the anniversary of Emily's death, a local paper ran a small piece.
No headline.
No photos, just a paragraph noting the passage of time, the tree, the continued impact. It ended with a sentence that felt more like a question. Some stories end when we stop asking. The town had not stopped asking, but it had learned how to live with not knowing. That learning was the final transformation of the case. From mystery to memory, from investigation to cautionary tale, from an active search for answers to a quiet acknowledgement of limits. And in that space between what was proven and what was believed, the story settled uneasy but stable, like something placed carefully on a shelf where it would be seen but not disturbed. Almost, because there was still one final detail, small, overlooked, waiting at the edge of awareness. The dispatcher log from 2003 contained a notation no one had ever explained. A single word, written in the margin beside the cutoff call. Whisper. It had never been defined, never followed up, never challenged. Just a note from a tired dispatcher, working a long shift, hearing something that didn't quite register as panic or noise. A whisper. And whispers, by their nature, are meant for someone close enough to hear them. The whisper never left the room. It lingered in the margins of the file, in the silence between sentences, in the space investigators learned not to touch. A single word, written quickly 2 decades earlier, now carried more weight than any confession or affidavit. Not because it explained anything, but because it refused to. Whisper. Not scream. Not cry. Not panic. A whisper implies proximity.
Intention.
Control. In the final years after the case's legal closure, a small review panel was convened, not to reopen the investigation, but to catalog unresolved anomalies for archival purposes. Cold cases that had technically ended but never truly rested. Emily Harper's file was placed on the table again, thinner now, stripped of motion and urgency, heavy only with implication. The dispatcher log was reviewed one last time. The audio, long degraded, was played through modern enhancement software. Static peeled away in layers. Frequencies were isolated. Voices stretched thin, then compressed. For hours, there was nothing new. Just the same broken fragments, the same cut-off transmission ending in a soft distortion. Then, at the very edge of detectability, something shifted. Not a word. Not a name. A breath. Too close to the receiver to be accidental. Too controlled to be fear. A breath drawn in, slow, deliberate, followed by a sound that might have been a whisper, or might have been someone trying not to be heard. The technicians disagreed on interpretation. Some said it was artifact. Others said it was interference. One refused to comment at all. No official conclusion was added to the file, because conclusions, once written, tend to harden. And this case had already hardened enough. Emily Harper remained frozen in public memory at 22 years old. The photographs never aged. The smile never changed. Time moved everywhere else, but not there. Not in the way people remembered her. Her parents passed away within a year of each other, both having lived long enough to see arrests made, verdicts reached, and questions unanswered. In her mother's belongings, a notebook was found. Inside were dates, names, and small observations written over many years. Nothing incriminating, nothing revelatory, except one line, written shortly after Emily's death. She said someone was watching. There was no context.
No explanation.
Just the sentence. Investigators debated whether it had ever been shared. Records suggested it hadn't. It hadn't fit any known timeline. It hadn't matched any suspect. So it had slipped quietly into obscurity, like so many other fragments that didn't know where they belonged. The town changed as towns do. New families moved in. Old buildings were replaced. The road where Emily was last seen was widened, resurfaced, renamed. There was no marker anymore. No sign to indicate what had once happened there. But locals still slowed down when they passed that stretch. Muscle memory outlasting reason. At night, some swore the place felt wrong. Too quiet, as if sound itself avoided it. Crow aged in prison, growing thinner, quieter. In his final interview request, denied, then quietly reconsidered, he was asked a single question. Was there anyone else? He smiled, just slightly, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, and said nothing. Pike never spoke again. Not to reporters, not to advocates, not even in private letters. He complied with every condition of his sentence, faded into institutional routine, and became unremarkable, which, in a case like this, felt deliberate. Years later, a young journalist revisiting the story for a long-form piece wrote something that never made it to print. It was cut by editors for being too speculative, too unsettling, too unresolved. It read, "Some cold cases are solved in court but remain open in the mind. They end on paper, but not in the places where fear once took root." The article was published without that line. The fear, however, remained. It lived in the whisper, in the breath on the recording, in the sentence written in a mother's notebook, in the feeling that something essential had been missed, not because it was hidden well, but because no one knew how to name it at the time. That is the quiet cruelty of unresolved truth. It doesn't announce itself. It waits, waiting for someone, somewhere, to realize that the most important sound in the room was never the scream that ended the call, but the whisper that came before it. And until that whisper is understood, this story does not truly end. It only falls silent. And silence, as this case has proven, can last forever. Silence has weight when it lasts long enough. After the final documents were archived and the last interviews faded from public memory, the Emily Harper case slipped into a different phase of existence. No longer active, no longer debated nightly on local radio. It became something quieter, more dangerous in its stillness. A story people assumed was finished, precisely because nothing more could be said out loud. But unfinished things do not disappear. They adapt. In the years that followed, the evidence room where Emily's belongings had once been stored was renovated. Shelves were moved, labels replaced, boxes reorganized by a system more efficient than the one that had failed her the first time. During the process, an intern noticed an item listed on an inventory sheet that did not exist in any physical container. One line, one absence.
Personal audio unverified.
No box number, no chain of custody notation, just the line. When questioned, senior staff dismissed it as a clerical error. Old systems had been messy. Early digital transfers were incomplete. Things went missing on paper all the time. The explanation was accepted because it needed to be, but the intern kept thinking about it. Personal audio implied intent. It implied something recorded deliberately, not passively captured like the dispatcher call. It implied a choice made by someone who believed sound might matter later. The file associated with the notation had a timestamp from 3 days before Emily disappeared. 3 days. No one could say who had entered it. The login records were gone. The backup drives corrupted. Once again, the case produced the same pattern it always had. An invitation to look closer, followed by nothing solid to hold. The intern left the department months later, carrying the unease with them like a private inheritance. Elsewhere, in the town that had learned how to coexist with its ghosts, the tree planted in Emily's name was struck by lightning during a summer storm. It didn't fall. It split down the middle and continued to grow anyway, bark scarred, shape altered, still alive. People noticed. They talked about it quietly. Some said it was symbolic. Others said it was just weather. But symbolism has a way of asserting itself when explanations run out. A former investigator, now living out of state, admitted years later that there had been a moment early in the case when he almost changed direction entirely. Almost followed a lead that didn't fit the others. A tip that felt wrong in a way he couldn't articulate. It involved a parked car. Engine off. Lights dark. Too close to the scene. Seen by more than one person. Never fully pursued because it didn't match the timeline everyone had already agreed on. Agreement, in retrospect, was the case's most dangerous feature. Once a narrative takes hold, it becomes efficient. It saves time. It filters noise. And it quietly discards anything that doesn't belong. Emily Harper's story had been filtered carefully. What remained was convincing. What was discarded was unknowable. Late one night, years after the last appeal, the original 911 call was played again on a local podcast. No analysis. No commentary. Just the raw audio, static and all. Listeners were invited to decide for themselves what they heard. Comments flooded in. Most heard nothing new. Some heard fear. A few claimed to hear a second presence breathing. One comment stood out. It was brief. That's not a whisper. That's someone listening. The post was deleted within hours. The account vanished. No trace. Coincidence, maybe, or just another moment slipping through the cracks. This is how cold cases truly endure, not as questions waiting for answers, but as systems that continue to produce doubt long after inquiry has ended. They become mirrors. What you see depends on what you bring with you. If you believe the case was solved, the silence feels earned. If you don't, the silence feels enforced. And in Emily Harper's case, silence had always arrived too early and stayed too long. Somewhere between the breath on the tape and the missing line in the inventory, between the whispered warning and the unpursued car, the story fractured. Not dramatically, quietly, in the way that allows people to keep going without noticing what they've stepped around. The town still moves forward. The road still carries traffic. The file still sits on a shelf marked closed. But closure is a word the law uses, not the truth. And the truth, whatever shape it takes, has not spoken yet. It is still listening. Listening is not a passive act. It requires patience, stillness, the willingness to accept that meaning may arrive without warning, or not arrive at all. Long after the Emily Harper case was stamped closed, that act of listening continued, not in interrogation rooms or court transcripts, but in quieter places where attention lingers longer than certainty. A decade after the final appeal, the old police station was scheduled for demolition. The building had outlived its usefulness, its walls saturated with decades of cigarette smoke, fluorescent hum, and conversations that never made it into reports. Before demolition, a standard archival sweep was conducted. Furniture removed, walls opened, forgotten spaces exposed. Behind a filing cabinet bolted to the floor of what used to be an interview room, workers found a narrow cavity in the wall. Inside it, dust, insulation, and a small handheld recorder. It was dead, battery corroded, plastic warped by heat. No label, no case number, just a recorder. Protocol demanded it be logged, photographed, and stored, which it was, efficiently, carefully, without urgency. The case associated with the room had never been specified, and the recorder itself bore no obvious connection to any single investigation. But someone noticed the date code on the internal circuit board. Manufactured early 2003. The device was sent to a private lab, not for forensic analysis but out of quiet curiosity. There was no expectation of recovery. Devices like that rarely survive intact. And yet, after weeks of delicate work, a partial data fragment was extracted. 37 seconds. Not continuous, not clean, just audio fragments stitched together by timestamps that barely held. Most of it was empty room tone, the sound of a space at rest, air moving, a faint electrical buzz. Then near the end, a sound, a footstep, not loud, not rushed, a single careful step, followed by a pause long enough to suggest listening.
No voices. No struggle.
No words. The lab technician wrote in their notes, presence inferred, not confirmed. The recorder was never officially linked to the Emily Harper case. Doing so would have required reopening questions no one had the authority or appetite to ask. Instead, it was catalogued as miscellaneous property, origin unknown. Another object without a story. But objects don't exist in isolation. They exist in patterns. And this case was nothing if not a pattern of proximity without confirmation. A former dispatcher, now retired, heard about the discovery through informal channels. She requested to listen to the recovered audio. She was denied, not because of policy, but because no one could determine whether she had standing. When asked what she remembered most about the night Emily disappeared, she didn't mention the cutoff call or the whisper notation. She mentioned the waiting. The line stayed open longer than it should have, she said. Not officially, but long enough for me to think someone else was deciding whether to speak. Deciding implies choice. Choice implies awareness. That idea unsettled the few people who still allowed themselves to think deeply about the case. Because awareness suggests that what happened was not chaos. It was not accident. It was controlled enough for someone to hesitate. Hesitation is rarely discussed in criminal timelines. It doesn't fit neatly between action and consequence. But it matters. It's where intention reveals itself. Emily Harper's life had intersected with something or someone that hesitated, that paused, that listened, and then proceeded anyway. Years passed. The recorder faded into obscurity. The intern who had noticed the missing inventory line eventually became a journalist. They never published anything about the case. Not because they lacked material, but because every attempt to assemble it felt incomplete, like describing a shadow without acknowledging the light source. One night, while reviewing old notes, they wrote a sentence and underlined it twice. Some crimes are not defined by what was done, but by what was almost said. That sentence remained unpublished. The town, meanwhile, continued its quiet evolution. Children grew up without knowing Emily's name. New residents learned the story secondhand, softened by time, stripped of urgency. But every so often, someone new would ask the same question, the one that never made it into official records. Why does it still feel unresolved? There was no good answer, because resolution is not a verdict. It's a feeling, and this case had never allowed that feeling to settle. Somewhere in an archive or a wall or a corrupted drive, something still waits. Not necessarily a confession, not necessarily a name, just context. The kind that turns whispers into words, footsteps into intent, silence into meaning. Until then, the Emily Harper case remains what it has always been at its core. Not a mystery of facts, but a mystery of presence. Someone was there. Someone listened. Someone chose silence. And that silence, stretched across decades, continues to listen back. Time does not resolve mysteries. It rearranges them. As the years pressed forward, the Emily Harper case stopped behaving like a single event and began to act like a pressure point. Touch it lightly and nothing happened. Press harder and the past pushed back. Not with answers, but with resistance. Files went missing. Memories contradicted themselves. Small details surfaced only to dissolve under scrutiny. What remained was atmosphere. A sense that the case was not unfinished because of a lack of effort, but because it resisted being finished. A criminologist studying long-term unresolved cases once described a phenomenon he called narrative saturation. When a story has been told too many times in too many ways, the truth doesn't vanish, it becomes camouflaged, buried beneath interpretation, smothered by certainty that arrived too early. Emily Harper's story had reached saturation years ago. Every retelling added confidence. Every confidence added distance. And distance is where uncomfortable things hide. A private investigator, hired briefly by a documentary team before funding collapsed, spent 3 months retracing the final 48 hours of Emily's life, not interviewing suspects, not reviewing evidence, just moving through the spaces she had occupied. Cafes, parking lots, sidewalks, the unremarkable geography of an ordinary week. He noted something no report had ever mentioned. Emily had been seen twice by 2 unrelated people standing still, not waiting, not distracted, just standing, as if deciding whether to move forward or turn back. Once outside a convenience store, once near the road where she would later disappear. Both witnesses used the same phrase. She looked like she was listening. The investigator never published his notes. He said they felt intrusive, as if he were documenting a private moment that had never been meant to survive. He returned the materials and walked away from the project entirely. Listening again. The pattern tightened. Listening appeared everywhere once it was noticed. On the call, in the recordings, in the witness's language, in the pauses that dotted the timeline like fingerprints without ridges. It suggested a presence that did not rush, did not need to, someone patient enough to wait for the right moment. Or for permission. That idea was never tested in court. It never could be. There was no statute for it. No charge that fit. Patience leaves no physical evidence. Years later, a maintenance worker clearing old signage near the widened road found a strip of reflective tape half buried in dirt. Faded, torn, indistinguishable from debris. It was collected out of habit, nothing more. Logged, forgotten. But reflective tape is used for one purpose, to be seen when light hits it. It is useless in daylight, meaningless without illumination. No connection was ever made between the tape and the case. There was no reason to, but its existence echoed the same quiet theme that had followed the story from the beginning, visibility that depends entirely on angle. What you see depends on where you stand. Emily Harper had stood at several thresholds in the days before she vanished. Between staying and leaving, between telling and withholding, between recognizing something as danger or dismissing it as nothing. Those moments never made it into official timelines. They rarely do. They are too human, too fragile, too easy to reinterpret after the fact. But they matter, because crimes do not always begin with violence. They often begin with recognition. Recognition followed by doubt. Doubt followed by silence. And silence, once chosen, is difficult to undo. The final public mention of the case came in the form of a brief academic paper on unresolved presence in closed investigations. Emily Harper's name appeared once, in a footnote. No details. No conclusions. Just a reference to auditory anomalies suggesting proximity awareness. That was it. A life reduced to a suggestion. The paper ended with a sentence that felt less like analysis and more like warning. Some cases remain open not because we lack answers, but because we lack the language to ask the right question. What was the right question here? Not who did this, not how it happened, not even why, but who was listening, and why did no one hear them in time? That question hovered, unanswered, as the case drifted further from public consciousness. Not solved, not unsolved, suspended, waiting for the moment when someone, somewhere, would finally realize that the most important witness had never been a person at all, but the silence that surrounded them. And silence remembers everything. Silence does not fade. It accumulates. By the 50th year after Emily Harper vanished, the case had become less a story than a residue. It clung to the town in ways no plaque or headline ever could. New generations grew up without learning the name, yet inherited the caution. Doors locked a little earlier. Parents listened a little longer when their children spoke about being watched. A reflex passed down without explanation. That is how unresolved cases survive. Not in memory, but in behavior. A university research team studying inherited risk perception included the town as an anonymized data point. Respondents reported a shared unease connected to a location most could not identify by name. A stretch of road. A gap between streetlights. A place that felt like a pause in the world. The researchers labeled it environmental imprinting. The locals called it instinct. Meanwhile, the last living investigator tied to the original case gave away his notes. Not to the department. Not to an archive. To his granddaughter, who asked once why he never talked about his work. He told her some stories don't want to be finished. In the margins of those notes, written in a hand that had grown unsteady with age, was a phrase repeated more than once. Presence without proof. He never explained it. When he died, the notes were boxed and stored. No one knew what to do with them. They were too incomplete to publish, too suggestive to ignore. Eventually, they were donated to a regional historical society and filed under unresolved civic events. A quiet category. A careful category. On the anniversary of Emily's disappearance, the tree, scarred by lightning, reshaped by storms, finally came down. Age and rot had hollowed it from the inside. The removal was unceremonious. No speeches. No gathering. Just workers, chainsaws, and a brief interruption of traffic. When the trunk split, those watching noticed something strange. The hollow ran straight through the center. The tree had been empty for years and still standing. People talked about it later not as symbolism but as fact. Something can look solid, can cast shade, can mark time while being hollow at its core. The comparison was never stated out loud. It didn't need to be. The final known document added to the Emily Harper case was a maintenance report. No names. No narrative. Just a timestamp and a note indicating that an old analog recorder, cataloged years earlier as miscellaneous property, had been decommissioned and destroyed due to degradation. No audio referenced. No review requested. Just an ending, or something that resembled one. Yet even then, the case refused to conclude cleanly, because what lingered was not evidence, but alignment. Too many moments that pointed in the same direction without converging. Too many pauses. Too much listening. Listening by Emily. Listening on the line. Listening in the room. Listening by someone who never needed to speak. That presence, unnamed, uncharged, unconfirmed, became the true shape of the mystery. Not a person to be caught, but a pattern to be recognized too late. And perhaps that is the final cruelty of this case. Not that justice was delayed. Not that answers were incomplete. But that the danger may have been understood in fragments, and dismissed because fragments don't scream. They whisper. So the story ends the way it always has. Not with resolution, but with awareness arriving after relevance. With a town that learned to listen long after the sound had passed. With a case officially closed, yet never truly gone. Because somewhere between the breath on a recording and the pause before a step, the truth chose silence. And silence, once chosen, does not explain itself. It waits.